My name is Björn Kjellberg. I live in Stockholm in Sweden, and I've been working as a bartender within the industry for the last 18 years, I think 18 or 19 years, and I've been working more or less full time, or at least very dedicated, with Mexican spirits like tequila and mezcal since around 2008 or 2009. So it's been a while, and I still love it as much as in the beginning. And we thought like this. So today we're gonna do an introduction to mezcal, what it is and how it came to be, and how you produce it and why it's different from tequila. And then on Monday we will do a follow-up, so another session, hopefully I got the technique going better then, where we will go through all the questions you can think of related to this, and hopefully also talk a bit about some cocktails and how you can actually work with mezcal. So that's the plan. So let's kick it off, because I'm not interesting. And I will switch, for you who just joined in, I will switch cameras or the angle from now and then, so I can show you some pictures, because it's always easier to understand, because mezcal and tequila, it's so very special. It's a very, very unique spirit, and I know you can say that about every spirit, because every spirit actually is or are unique. But there really is something special with the mezcal and the tequila. And first things first. So everything starts with a raw material, right? No matter what you're going to do, you need a good raw material. And with mezcal, it's the agave plant, same as we use for tequila. It's an agave plant. And a lot of people, there's a huge misconception that the agave is a cactus or a relative to cactus, and also that it's a lily plant, which it is not. It's not a cactus. It is, of course, related to cactus, but not very close at all. Not more than they are both plants. So the agave is a family of species of its own. And it's about, say, somewhere between 200 and 300 different varieties of agave to be found in the world. And nowhere in the world is a higher concentration of different styles or types of agaves than in Mexico. They have more than 200 indigenous types of agaves in Mexico alone. And this is what an agave looks like. I don't really think it looks like a cactus at all. It looks like, and a close relative to the agave is the aloe plant, like aloe vera. So that's a closer relative, actually. And since there are so many different types of agave, they can look very different. And this specific type of agave here, it's called the blue agave, and that's the one we use when we produce tequila, and that's the only one you're allowed to use when you produce tequila. And that's the first difference between tequila and mezcal. For tequila, you must use the blue agave plant, while when you produce mezcal, you can technically use any kind of agave that you like. This is the most common one. It's called espadin. Espadin means sword, because they thought the leaves here looked like swords. So this is the most common one to use for mezcal. But you use, say that's around 30 to 40 different agaves that you used. This is another one called tobala. Tobala means, it's an indigenous language in Zapoteca, so it means kind of like hot, in the sense of like hot and spicy, or la means that, and toba comes from the old ancient word for agave in Zapoteca, which is doba. So it means like a spicy or hot agave, which says a lot about how the mezcal actually tastes like when you drink mezcal made from this tobala plant. This is a tepestate, very special mezcal that can take up to 40 years to mature the plant. This is an agave called madrecuche. Looks almost like a little palm tree, right? And this is the mother of all agave plants. All agaves comes from the madrecuche from the beginning, and then it just evolved. Here's one called barril. Barril means barrel, because it kind of looks like a barrel in its shape here. Makes a really nice mezcal. This is a special one called Montana, and when it's ripe, it turns red, bright red. So it really is a special, and you can make mezcal from this as well. So the agave is really, really special. So the first thing that differs tequila from mezcal is the agave and what agave you use. Tequila you can only use blue agave, and mezcal you can use technically or in theory any agave that you like. The other thing, like key thing to mezcal and tequila, is that it is a spirit with a designation of origin, which means you can only produce it in certain areas and you need to follow certain rules, just like champagne or Scotch whiskey or cognac and so on. And for tequila you can produce in 5 states in Mexico. I'll show you another slide here. So this is Mexico, and the blue ones here, that's where you can produce tequila in those areas. But pretty much all tequilas that you find is produced here in the state of Jalisco in western Mexico. That's also where the town of Tequila is. That's why it got its name. But for mezcal, you can produce in 10 different states now. It grows the designated area. So all the yellow areas here, that's where you can produce mezcal. But the main region for mezcal, and what we're going to focus on, is here in southern Mexico, here in the state of Oaxaca, because that's a center for mezcal. The mezcal you can find globally pretty much, I think it's around 94% of all mezcal produced is from Oaxaca, but you can and are allowed to produce it in all the other yellow marked states here. So now we clear that, the difference between tequila and mezcal. A bit of history. Mezcal, what we need to understand is that mezcal is the indigenous spirit of Mexico. And mezcal is the mother of all the different agave spirits that you find in Mexico, because you produce spirits from agave all across Mexico. But not all of those different spirits have a specific name or a set of rules or are like an official spirit, such as tequila and mezcal. But the agave has always played a very significant role for the indigenous people in Mexico as a source of food and nutrition. And also you can produce a lot of materials and items from the agave. Like the big long leaves that you saw. Let me get a picture again here. Here's a good one. Yeah, so here you see the long leaves. They are hard and fleshy and rich in fibers. So if you burn the leaves and crack them open, you take the fibers out and you can produce ropes. It's one of the sturdiest and hardest material you can find to make ropes from. And people have been knowing this for many, many, many thousands of years. And if you see at the end of the leaves, you see this thorn here, like a spike or a needle. That one is super sharp and pretty hard. So you can crack the needle and then just pull it down the leaves like this. So you get the fiber. So you have a needle and thread naturally. And also if you cut the leaves open, it comes out like an ointment, just like aloe vera. So you can use that for burns and cuts and bruises and when you're injured. And this is something people have known for thousands of years. So the agave was super important for the indigenous people in Mexico. And the most important part of the agave is the stem or the core, the center of the plant. So what you do is you cut away all the leaves and you reveal the stem or the core, and it looks like this. This is a pile of agave cores you see here. They're called piñas because they look like a pineapple or a pine cone. And this one is rich in starch and in fibers. And if you cook this or heat it, it turns soft and very sweet because it's super rich in nutritions. So you can eat it. And we know for a fact, because they found on archaeology sites in Mexico, they found leavings from people been cooking agave and also chewing and eating agave all across Mexico. That's older than 9,000 years. So the people have been using agave for more than 9,000 years. So the agave has always been very, very close to the indigenous people in Mexico. And of course, somewhere along the line, they discovered they can produce alcohol from it. And in the beginning, it was not a spirit as it is today, like a high alcohol or high ABV or high proof spirit. In the beginning, it was low ABV fermented beverage, kind of like a wine or a beer, and it's called pulque. And it's something you can still find in Mexico. Now it has started to turn into an industry, but mainly you buy it like on the side of the road when you're out driving in the landscape. You can find pulquerias, and you can find people selling pulque. And this is the original alcoholic beverage from the agave. So it looks like this. So you take the agave and at the top of the plant here, you cut a hole. So then the sap from the stem collects in this little hole, and then you collect it and leave it to ferment naturally with all the wild yeast floating around in the air. And then you get this milky, acidic, really weird drink called pulque. It's low in alcohol, not more than maybe 3, 4, 5% ABV. So it's kind of like a beer or a wine. And of course, the agave was, since the people got so much from the agave, it was a very sacred plant. So they thought that this drink was a gift from the gods. So they only used it for ceremonies and for special occasions. Unless you were of power or wealth in the villages, then you could drink pulque more often, because they said that the powerful people in the cities and the villages, they drank pulque to get closer to the gods. So they could talk to the gods and foresee the future, so they could like help lead the people to the right path. In reality, they pretty much just wanted the good stuff for themselves. That's how people of power often does it. Anywho, and then like the next big event in the history was when the Spaniards arrived in what was going to become Mexico in the early 1500s. I think in 1519, Hernán Cortés set foot on Mexican soil and claimed Mexico as Spanish. So in the beginning, Mexico was called Nueva España and Nueva Galicia, like New Spain and New Galicia. And of course, in Europe, we knew how to distill. We learned that from the Arabs in the 700s. And we were, as Europeans, we were pretty much raging alcoholics back then. So whenever we set sail to claim new land and new countries, we always brought someone who knew how to distill, and we brought equipment to distill. So of course, once they discovered all the magic about the agave, they also discovered the pulque and learned about the pulque from mainly the Aztecs who was popularizing the central of Mexico. So of course they tried to distill the pulque to get a cleaner taste and to get a higher alcohol, because 3-4% wasn't good enough for the Spaniards. So they started experimenting with distilling this pulque, and they got this new spirit that they named vino de mezcal. So vino as wine or alcohol in general. De means from, and mezcal they took from Nahuatl languages, and it's Spanishified expression. It's really in Nahuatl it's mezcal metel, which means cooked agave. So it's alcohol from cooked agave. So that's where the name mezcal comes from. And then it got shortened from vino de mezcal to mezcal. You follow? And then, so in the beginning, you could say that all agave spirits in Mexico was called mezcal. And then it developed into different styles, that we had a specific type of mezcal called tequila, who then got its own designation of origin and became a spirit of its own. And up north in Mexico, they started to call their mezcal bacanora, who is also now a protected spirit of Mexico. And then in 1995, so not that long ago, I know I'm very old, but for me 1995 is not that long ago, mezcal got its own designation of origin. So now mezcal is a protected spirit of its own that can only be produced in these areas that I showed you earlier. And so mezcal is an ancient spirit. It's at least more than 500 years old. But at the same time, and this makes it complex, mezcal is at the same time something new. Because the tequila industry has been blooming, and tequila has always been like a spirit you find in pretty much any bar anywhere in the world. Whilst mezcal was pretty much forgotten up until very, very recently, I would say. And the people who kept it alive, who kept the tradition alive, because there were not really any big market for it. There were no like economy in mezcal. So the people who kept it alive did it because of tradition and because it's part of their cultural heritage. And mainly that's the people of the Zapotecas, which is an indigenous group of people who lives in southern Mexico, mainly in the state of Oaxaca. And that's why mezcal is so strong and so popular in Oaxaca, because of the Zapotec people who always lived there and still lives there. So they kept the tradition alive. So you could say that the Zapoteca that's the mezcal people. And now, I mean, we as bartenders started paying an interest in tequila and in crafted tequila and started to go to Mexico, and it started to grow, this crafted tequila scene. And then it rippled down to what else can we find here in Mexico, because Mexico is such a special country. And people started to discover mezcal. And now mezcal is slowly turning into something that you can make a living on. It's not just about tradition, even though most Zapotec producers, they protect their culture and their heritage, but now they can make a living from it. They can actually have a better life than they used to have. And this is something that's happened the last 5, 6, 7 years at large. And to give you a bit of perspective, the tequila industry annually produces roughly 300 million liters of tequila each year, all the producers. Whilst the mezcal industry last year produced 7 million liters. See the difference? Tequila is 300 million liters. Mezcal is 7 million liters in total. The first time I went to Oaxaca, when I started working with this in 2010, the total production of mezcal was 900,000 liters. It wasn't even 1 million liters. That's how small it was. And that's how much it has been growing just in 10 years, which is amazing, because now more people can make a living out of it. And one of the key people in this and to getting the word about mezcal out there is a man named Ron Cooper, who in 1995, he's an artist, Ron Cooper, and he went to Mexico for different reasons, and he fell in love with the state of Oaxaca. And he found mezcal, or mezcal found him, as we usually say. And he felt like this, he felt that it was on him to show the world this treasure, this cultural spirit treasure named mezcal. So he founded a brand and started pushing mezcal, first in the US, and then it found its way over to Europe and then to Asia and so on. And that's Del Maguey, who was founded in 1995. So Del Maguey was like a pioneer within the mezcal, and then a new wave came some 10 years later. That's when mezcal found me. And now, are you following so far? Hey, I don't hear you, so I guess so. That's a good thing. And also a thing that we need to realize when talking about mezcal, even though it's growing and so on, it's still super small and super tiny. There are I think it's one or two, like it's one big distillery, the rest is small. We call the small mezcal distilleries is called palenques. And I'm going to show you a picture here of a little palenque. You see this little hut there up in the mountains? The mezcal that's produced there, you can find it in all over the world. I think it's like available in like 30 different countries, but everything is produced in that little shed, and that's normal. That's how it looks in the mezcal industry. So it's super tiny and it's super small, and the production starts, of course, with the agave, and agave is also a bit rare and unique in the spirit world because it takes a long time for each plant to mature. The blue agave that we use for tequila, that I show you here, that one takes about somewhere between 7 to 10 years for one plant to mature. And one plant weighs about somewhere, say roughly 50 kilos, 30 to 50 kilos, and it takes 7 kilos for 1 liter of tequila. And this one, the espadin, that's the most common one, it is called espadin. That takes about the same time as the blue agave, so 7 to 10 years to mature. So you have to wait a long time out in the fields before you can harvest. Then the other agaves, like the tobala, that can take up somewhere between 15 to 18 years to mature. So you have to wait a long time, and you don't cultivate it because it's growing out in the wild. So you use wild agave a lot in the mezcal industry. The espadin, it's cultivated, whilst tobala, for instance, it's wild. So you find a plant, then you need to protect that plant in the wild and wait for maybe 10 or 15 years before you can harvest it and turn it into a mezcal. And these others you need more mezcal, because in modern methods that we use in tequila is 7 kilos per liter. Here with the tobala it can be up to 12-15 kilos per liter, and one plant doesn't weigh much more than 20-30 kilos. And this one, it's called jabali, which means boar. And it's named because you see the leaves here looks like the trunks that boars have. That can take 20 or more years to mature in the wild. So you have to wait for a long time before you can harvest the agave. So that's number one, the agave, and time for the agave to mature. And once it's harvested, you need to, because then you cut away the leaves, so you get this stem or the core. I'll show you the picture of that again. That's how it looks. So here, all the white areas here, that's where the leaves have been growing on the agave. And this stem or the core, the piña, it's very rich in starch that we need to convert to sugars. And then we're going to convert the sugars to alcohol. And you do that by adding heat. And this is probably the biggest difference between tequila and mezcal, because when you make tequila, this heating process to convert the starch to sugars are either performed by pressure. See here, this is pressure cookers. So you load them with a couple 15-20 tons of agave and you cook it for 12 hours with pressure. Or you can do the more old school methods by using stone ovens or brick ovens that you see here. So same there, you load it with 15 tons of agave, seal it, and then you add water steam. It takes about 3 days to cook the agave. That's how you make tequila, and that's the trick. Where mezcal, when you make mezcal, you use, in those small palenques I showed you, the small distilleries, they use old ancient methods, the methods that's been used for thousands and hundreds of years. So what you do when you cook, this is the oldest form of preparing hot food that is known to man, as far as I know. So first you start here with digging a hole in the ground, and you see all the rocks laying around here. You light a fire, and then you cover. And then we take all the questions in the next episode. It's called the Ordinario, though. Then you cover the fire with rocks, and then you put the agave cores around there. So it looks like this. And since it's an open fire, you see all the smoke coming out? That's the cooking of the agave. And since it's a fire, all the flavors and the smoke, those aromas, the agave attracts those aromas. And that's where it gets this very rustic, sometimes smoky, and very earthy, natural, wild flavors of mezcal comes from this cooking process. And once you've filled your pit or your hole with agaves, you cover it with dirt and leave it there for anything from 3 to 30 days, depending on the season and the agave and so on. And this is where mezcal gets a lot of its characteristical flavors from. It's from this cooking. I would say this is the biggest difference between tequila and mezcal, the cooking process. You are allowed to cook mezcal, prepare mezcal like this, but you just don't by tradition. And you are allowed to make tequila like this, but you don't of tradition, and because it takes so long time, so it gets really expensive. So that's the first step. Next step is to squeeze the juice out of this now cooked agave, because we need the juice to ferment it. And in the tequila industry, you use mechanical roller mills. So you get juice on one end and fibers and residues on the other end. Collect the juice, add yeast, let it ferment. Super easy, right? Whereas in the mezcal industry, we incorporate an century-old method called tahona, which pretty much is this. So here, in this stone-lined pit here, you put the cooked agave, and then you have this tahona stone, which is a big, huge stone wheel that weighs about a ton. And then you have mules, oxen pairs, or horses to pull this stone slowly over the agave. So it takes a lot of time. I think we can start this here. Or can we? Yeah. Here you see the slow pressing of the agave. So that's how we do it in mezcal. And I'll answer that question in a while. And as you can probably imagine, it's pretty hard to collect or isolate the juice from the fibers when you pressed everything with a big stone wheel. So what you do is you collect all the fibers, so it ferments together with the fibers. So it gets like I guess you can say a maceration of flavors. I show you a picture of this as well, because it's always easier to understand once you see it. Yeah, here it is. So if you look here we have collected all the fibers, the juicy fibers here. And here's the juice that's separated. So it ferments together. So you get an extra extraction of flavors. And you rarely add yeast when you produce mezcal. You just use airborne natural yeast, which is important because you really get the flavors and the aromas from the surroundings. That's why we do it. So no added yeast rarely in mezcal. And then it's time for distillation. And same there. I mean, as you probably figured out by now, most things in the mezcal industry, it's made by tradition, and they made it in the same way for generations, and everything is pretty much man-made or handmade by themselves. Same goes with the stills that we use to distill mezcal. Usually they contain some part of copper, but this is a very traditional mezcal still. Maybe I can make it bigger, like that. So you see over here, you have the kettle here where you put all the fermented juices that I show you, and you put the fibers in here as well. So you cook it with matter. You cook it with the fibers, and then you heat it under here with open fire. Always open fire when you make mezcal, and the fumes come over here, and here it's a coil, so it cools down. This one is filled with water, so it cools down, and out here in this plastic bucket you get mezcal. This is a bartender from Copenhagen getting to try the mezcal straight from the still. So that's pretty much how you produce mezcal. So it is an ancient spirit, and it's still produced pretty much in the same ways as it has been for hundreds of years, which makes it so precious and so pristine and so special. And also it's important now for us, when the volumes are going up, it's really important to protect this and not taking away the essence or the soul of the mezcal. And same with a lot of the agaves. I mean, take the tobala that I show you. It can take up to 12-15 years for one plant to mature, and there's a limit of how much plants there are. So if the whole world would decide one day now we're going to start drink agave mezcal made from the tobala agave, we would run out of agave pretty fast because it's a wild plant. So it's a really special spirit. And to talk about the flavor profile, I would say that, like, in the beginning, like say in the 1800s, early 1900s, tequila and mezcal, they tasted the same. It was the same thing pretty much. Then the tequila industry evolved with technical new gadgets, new tools. You made it more efficient. So tequila is cleaner and smoother in the taste, I would say. Whilst mezcal, it's more rustic and earthy. Most people refer to mezcal as smoky, and I don't like to do that because not all mezcals are smoky, but yes, there are a big smokiness to it. So that's probably the biggest difference, I would say. And then when it comes to like how to categorize mezcal, since it's got a set of rules, they have, and I would say that's how you can define premium, because they changed the rules for mezcal last year. So in tequila, we have two different types or categories of tequila. We have tequila, which is 51% agave, and then we have 100% agave, which is made from 100% blue agave. Whilst in mezcal is always 100% agave. You're not allowed to use any other crops or any other raw materials. But instead, you have three different categories based on how it is produced. So first is the one called mezcal, which is the entry level. And it must be made from agave. It must be made entirely within this designated area of origin, this geographical area I showed you. Must be produced within this area. But then you don't have to cook the agave underground. You don't have to use those whole metal stills. You don't have to use natural yeast. You can do it as you produce a vodka pretty much, or a rum or a whiskey or whatever, and call it mezcal. As long as you use agave and you are within the borders of this area. Then the second type is called artesanal. It's like crafted mezcal. And that's probably the more premium stuff, I would say. or at least more crafted or more true. And to use that term, artesanal mezcal, you must cook the agave with open fire, underground or overground, and you must press it, pressed cooked agave, either with mechanical mills or with those Tahona mills I showed you, or by hand. And you must use natural yeast, like airborne yeast. Cannot add too much yeast there. And you must distill it in those pot stills that I showed you. And then there's the last category, which is mezcal ancestral. There you need to cook the agave underground. You must crush it by hand. You must use natural materials, so you cannot ferment it in, say, stainless steel. It must be wood or stone or clay or something. And it must be distilled of the old style of stills that are made from, partly made from wood or clay, which is an old ancient style of distillation, only found in Southeast Asia and in Mexico. So it's another way of distilling. So I would say that's the premium. So it's depending on how crafted the production is, you can add artesanal or ancestral to the term or the word mezcal. And then there are 6 different types, same as, but they're not the same as in tequila, where we have blanco, which is unaged, joven, which is colored or flavored, and then we have reposado, aged for 2 months, añejo, aged for 1 year, and extra añejo for 3 years. In mezcal instead, we have joven or blanco, which is unaged. So mezcal joven is unaged, no wood. Then they got something called madurado and vidrio, which means matured on glass. That means the mezcal has been rested in glass containers that you bury underground. So you take big 5-liter glass bottles or damujanas, fill them with mezcal, dig them underground and leave them there for a full year. And a lot of people say that spirits don't change once they're distilled, but mezcal does. I don't know how, I don't know why, but it does change. So that's a type called madurado and vidrio. And then you can age it. It's very rarely done. It's really hard to find aged mezcal, but they do exist. And there is, same as tequila, reposado is 2 months on oak barrels, and añejo is a full year on oak barrels. And then you're also allowed to flavor the mezcal either through infusion or through distillation, which you also do, kind of like you would flavor a gin. So that's pretty much the basics of mezcal and how you produce it. And another thing that's pretty special to mezcal in the world of spirits, a bit to tequila as well, but it's even more pronounced in mezcal, is that you can actually talk about the terroir as you do in wine. You know, when they talk about wine, they often talk about the terroir, like the sense of originality or sense of origin, because, you know, there are a lot of grapes, and if you take a wine made from the Pinot Noir grape that has been growing in France, it's going to taste different than a Pinot Noir grape that's been growing in New Zealand. You get a different flavor. And that goes for everything that grows, of course. But if you take like corn, for instance, or grains or sugar canes, since you can harvest that every year, it does not get as affected, or as you don't get the environmental influence as much, since you harvest it each year. Whilst the agave, remember, it sits in the same soil under the same sun for more than 10 years a lot of times. So it gets very impacted and influenced by its surroundings, which gives us a lot of terroir. So you can taste if an agave espadín has been growing in southern Oaxaca or up in the mountains in northern Oaxaca, for instance. There's a huge difference depending on where the mezcal is produced, which is pretty unique in the spirit world for mezcal. which makes it also very interesting, I think. So that's one end. And then the other end that you have is that all the different agaves have different characters. Just like all the different grapes have different character. Chardonnay does not taste like Cabernet Sauvignon, and Cabernet Sauvignon does not taste like Pinot Noir. And the same here, the agave Tobala, it's got its flavor profile, and the Espadin got its flavor profile. So it's really a broad or a huge area of flavor profile to explore once you start digging into the mezcal world. And I heard that there are not many mezcals, or pretty much no mezcal available in Nepal, which I feel for you. And I talked to my friends at Del Maguey, so we talked about it, because I told him that I was going to do this presentation for you, and he said, yeah, find us an importer and we can ship mezcal. So that's going to be your homework. Find someone who can import mezcal to Nepal, and I'll make sure you get it, because you need it there. So that's pretty much like the very basics of the mezcal production. So, and it's all about pretty much two things. It's all about the agave, and it's all about the cultural heritage from the indigenous people in Mexico. And just here, people have been coming in lately. We're going to do another episode or another broadcast on Monday, where we're going to go through all the questions. So today is just me talking like the basics, and then remember all the questions, and then on Monday I'm going to answer everything, every single question you might have. But just a quick repetition here. So the first thing is where in Mexico you produce your spirit. Trying to find something to point with here. So this is the map of Mexico. So in the blue areas here, you can produce tequila. The main one is the state of Jalisco here. And in the yellow areas, you can produce mezcal. And the main area is down here in southern Mexico, in Oaxaca, which is home to a lot of indigenous people, but mainly the Zapotecas, who is the mezcal people. Second thing is the agave, what agave you use, because you will get a very different result, and it's controlled by the laws. This is the blue agave used for tequila, and this is the agave espadin that you use for mezcal, but you may use other agaves as well for mezcal. Here's me with a huge agave as a bonus. I'm not that tall, to be honest. I'm 175 centimeters, but that's a huge plant. Anywho, then you cut the leaves so you get the core of the agave that you see here, rich in starch and fibers. Then you cook it. In tequila, we cook it in pressure or with steam, whilst in mezcal, we cook it underground with fire. And that's where mezcal gets its smoky flavors. Then we press it, and in mezcal we use the Tahona method, which is the stone wheel and a horse. I get to see the horse again. And I know this is a question I can answer, because I know you all been wondering. The horse's name. His name is Blackie. I don't know. I pretty much know why, because he's black. But it's a very common horse name in the mezcal industry, Blackie. 10 years ago, the most common name for a horse in the mezcal industry was Rambo. I don't know why. Then fermentation. So you ferment it with the fibers to get extra extraction. In tequila, you ferment without the fibers. Distillation. Tequila is common pot stills. In mezcal, small homemade wood-fired, open-fired stills, and you distill it with the fibers. This is how it looks. It's one of the biggest producers of mezcal. So you see, this is one of the biggest producer, and it still looks like this. This is the entire production facility here. It's beautiful. This is from the inside. You see the fibers and everything. And here you see the stills. So that's how mezcal is done, pretty much. Don't forget to join us next week, where we'll answer all the questions and also talk a bit more about how you consume mezcal in Oaxaca and how we can work with mezcal in cocktails today. Because again, mezcal is an old spirit, but it's been forgotten and hidden almost. So there aren't really any like classic mezcal cocktails, more classic serves of mezcal. But I will go through more of that tomorrow. So I hope I know it's probably a lot to take in, probably maybe a bit confusing, but let it macerate over the weekend. And whatever is unclear, whatever questions, don't hesitate to save that for Monday. I'm really looking forward to it. And again, thank you so much for inviting me to this. I think this is super cool thing that you have put together, and I'm really honored to be the one doing this little talk. And you probably can find me on Facebook if you want to have a chat about mezcal or something. And no, not all mezcals are smoky. So thank you so much, and have a great weekend, and I'll see you all on Monday. Viva Mexico. Oh, another homework. How do you say, because my name Björn means bear, the animal, the animal bear. I want to learn how to say bear in Nepalese. That's what you're going to give me tomorrow. Take care now. Bye-bye.